everyone. Welcome back to the Pleasuring Shed. Thank you very much for all your kind comments and your subscriptions and your likes from my previous videos. I really appreciate that. It really does help. If you are new to the channel and you enjoy what you see in the video coming up, please don't forget that you can like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell and that will let you know to any new content that comes along. So in today's video, we are going to be refurbishing an old porcupine quill, bringing it back into the 21st century and giving it another chance to catch some fish. Before we move on to that, I just want to say that please remember that I am not a professional float maker. I am an amateur, an enthusiastic amateur, but an amateur nonetheless. And I'm sure there will be techniques and procedures and equipment that I use that you would use differently or choose to use differently. That's your choice. I have no problem with that. So let's crack on and let's take a look at the porcupine quill. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, fishing in the 1980s, I had my Shakespeare rod and reel. I was chuffed to bits with it. But even then, porcupine quill, like this one, was still old-fashioned then. I used to get my floats from the front cover of the Angling Times and the Angler's Mail, all the freebies, and pretty much most of them filled my tackle box. But a porcupine quill is a really, really fantastic float. In fact, nowadays it's one of my absolute favorites. If I'm looking for a float, I'll go to a porcupine quill. I absolutely love them. So you can see the quill, really basic. It's just a stick with a red top. That's it, really basic. Add a little bit of decoration to it just for a bit of color. But the floats themselves, the porcupine quill itself, is really strong, really durable, will stand up to loads of abuse from fish and sometimes from anglers as well. But they're really, really good floats, and they come in all different shapes and sizes, different weights. So let's take a look at some of the quills that we're going to find. So as I said, the porcupine quill is a really great float to use. And if you've been lucky enough to be left some tackle by a relative, and you've rummaged through that tackle box and you found some floats, some old quills in there, you think, oh, I'll just get rid of those because they're a bit naff. Actually, stop. They are not naff. They're perfectly usable with a little bit of TLC and a little bit of paint. There are a few things that you do need to be aware of, though. When you're looking at old quills, there's some things that you need to sort of just search out for on the quill itself and make sure that it's in good condition. So if you look at the quills I've got here on the mat, both of them actually look quite good. They seem all right, but they're not. And let me show you why. So looking at this quill first, we can see that it looks fine. Doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it, but there's one major flaw. It's completely hollow. Look, you can feel, can you see that? How I can crush that? There's nothing inside it. Look how bendy that is. And that's because something has got inside and eaten it basically from the inside out. I don't know what it is, whether it's some kind of beetle larvae or a moth larvae or something like that, but it absolutely destroys the quills. So there we are. So that one's going in the bin. Another example I've got is this quill here. Again, it looks absolutely fine until you turn it over and you can see, let me hold it up to the camera. Can you see the hole here? And that is where the larvae, I'm going to call it a larvae, I don't know what else it is. I've tried looking online, but I can't actually find any information about what type of insect or creature it is that gets in and eats the quill. But they've got inside this one. There's a little hole there, and there's another little hole a little bit further up. So again, this quill has been completely destroyed. And if I squash it again, you can see that it just crushes and snaps. There's nothing inside. It's completely hollow. So there we are. So that's two floats that I'm not going to be able to use. Generally, quills are quite hardy and can stand up to quite a lot. So let's take a look at how we're going to prep some of our old quills and make them into good quills. So a good source of old quills is charity shops, car boot sales, tackle fairs, things like that. There's also that well-known auction site as well. I don't know why I keep calling it that, but there we are. So I've chosen some old floats that I've got laying around. I've got some old quills here. And the first thing we're going to need to do is really just take everything off and take them right back to the quill and just have a blank canvas to start working from. So the first float I've got here is actually not in too bad condition, but it's not my style. I don't want to make it look like one of my floats. It's got a bit of a bent bottom, but we can sort that out at the end. So the first thing we're going to do is take a box cutter or a Stanley knife, as we call them, and we're just literally going to scrape the surface. There's varnish on this float, and we've got the red and yellow paint as well. So we just want to scrape that off and take it back down to the bare quill. Be aware that if you are suffering from any kind of respiratory conditions, that there might be a little bit of dust created from this. This is old paint as well. I don't quite know what's in that old paint. It might be lead based, I'm not sure. So please wear a mask and please do it in a well ventilated area. My door is open, so there's lots of ventilation in my shed. So let's get on and scrape back this paintwork. So using the blade, what I don't want to do is cut into the quill. I'm literally going to use the flat edge of the blade and I'm going to scrape it along. It makes a horrible noise. If you don't like the sound of fingernails on blackboards, put some earplugs in. So here we go. Let's just start scraping away some of the old paint, and you can see it comes off quite easily. Don't press too hard. You don't want to damage the actual quill itself. So just a light scraping. Again, like I say, using the flat edge of the blade. And keep scraping until we can start to see the original quill underneath. You see the paint's beginning to really flake off now. It's a slow process, so just take your time. There's no rush. And I'll keep going all the way around. You can see what I'm doing here. I will complete that and get that all nice and cleaned, and then I'll turn my attention to the other end and I'll just repeat the same process. So this end is more likely to be having an old varnish on it. So just scraping off the old varnish and keep it going all the way around, nice and even strokes until all that varnish has been removed. So I'll keep on with this and I'll join you in a minute or two once I've got it all finished. So all the paint's off, all the varnish is off, and I'm back to a bare quill. The last thing I want to do is I want to just tidy up this end here because I've got a little bit of a bent end at the bottom there. So I'm going to get my sanding block and I'm just going to take off that tight bit at the bottom, the spiky bit. Yeah, be careful because they really are quite sharp. If you're interested, this bit, this end, the fatter end of the quill is actually the bit that goes into the animal. That's the bit that's like a feather. That's the bit that will be inside the animal, and it's the really spiky bit, the bits that get stuck in people or animals or anything else. That's the defense mechanism. So yeah, so we're just taking off that really spiky bit. We're going to do that, and that will be our end to put the ring on as well, the eyelet. So just sand that down. I'm going to take off a fair amount actually, because I don't want the end to be too thin. And again, don't forget, wear a mask or something like that if you've got any issues with your breathing. That's a little bit flatter now. Just flattening that off. There we are. So the next thing I'm going to do is just give the whole thing a nice even sand over, just to make sure it's all nice and clean. So a bit of finer sandpaper this time, and just giving a good old sand over. You can see it goes kind of white and it looks like it's a bit scratched. Actually, don't worry, because when we put our varnish on later on, that takes off. It loses that white matte look and goes nice and clean. And I can actually demonstrate that now. I just wet my finger. If I just rub my finger along it, you can see again, it just takes all that off and it will go nice and shiny. See that? So I've sanded the bottom end. Let's sand the top end as well, just to make sure it's all nice and clean. Taking that little top coat of sanding off there, just nibbing it off, just allows the varnish to go on nicely as well. As I say, when you put that varnish on, it will take away that sort of scratchy look to it and give a nice shiny finish. So there we are. So our quill is now ready to add some details to. There's a couple of things we need to talk about before we start adding those details. Now, before we start to construct our quill, there's a couple of things we need to think about and options that we might want from the quill itself and how we choose to fish it. A standard quill is great with an eyelet on the bottom. You can fish it like a waggler, where you just put some locking shot either side of the float or float rubbers to lock it in place on your line, and then you fish it like a standard fishing waggler. You can use top and bottom. So we don't necessarily need to whip on an eyelet at the bottom of the float. So if we look at this float here, you can see the fishing line comes in from the top and goes through a little rubber band, which holds that to the float. And then we've got a little rubber band at the bottom of the float as well. So we've put the float on top and bottom. Then the line comes through there and down to your hook and your bait. I've got a little split shot on there just to represent that. The other option is that we do whip on an eyelet and you can still fish top and bottom, but this time the line comes through the band at the top, the little elastic band at the top, and through the eyelet as well, and then down to your fishing line. So there's lots of different options to think about. If you put an eyelet at the bottom of the float, you have the option of fishing top and bottom and fishing it like a waggler. But if you don't put the eyelet on the bottom, like this float here, then you only have the option of fishing it top and bottom. So that might affect your choice of float. I personally would go for the eyelet at the bottom, and that gives me a little bit more versatility. So there is something else we need to look at when we're choosing the design of our floats. So let's look at some different quills and see what we think. So another thing to consider when you're designing your float is the actual design of it itself. We are going to be making just a standard porcupine quill. I've not made any alterations to the quill itself other than just shaping it off the bottom tip there where we're going to put the eyelet. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what you can do if you want a more standardized set of floats, all the same length and the same design, is do what we've done here. And all I've done is just cut the tops off, the spiky bit, and rounded that off with a bit of sandpaper, and measured them all, and they're all the same length, and they look much nicer in your tackle box if that's your thing. I'm going to be putting these up for sale very, very shortly. They need a final coat of varnish, and they will be on my eBay shop. You can find the link in the description. But we're going to move on now, and we're really going to start to get our teeth into making that quill float. So we've got our quill nice and cleaned off. It's pretty much back to bare bones, and we're going to start to rebuild it. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a little flat edge like we've done before on the previous floats. Don't forget to check out my other videos. We're going to make two little flat edges, one either side, and that's going to be where the eyelet's going to sit. So using the sanding block again, finger on the top, and we're just going to make a flat edge. Don't need to put too much pressure on here. The quill's quite soft. So you've got flat edge one side, turn it over, and just repeat the process. There we are. And once we've got the two flat edges, we're now going to put a split down the middle with our sharp knife, and we can put our line in that. So let's do that now. So we'll take our scalpel. You can see this, and we're just going to find the center and just pushing down firmly, just splitting the very end of the quill. So now we're going to put the thread into the little split. So as always, I start off with my black thread. I say as always, as you saw on the floats you saw earlier, I started with a green thread. So I don't always start with black thread. So the color choices, of course, is yours. So take the end of the thread, and we're going to place it in that slot, in that cut that we made. Give it a little pull down, and there we are. And we've got that little tag end, which is going to be burnt off using our lighter. So be careful when you do this. So light it up, let it burn down, and when it gets to the bottom, just put your finger on it. That squashes down that little bit of thread there and gives it a nice tight fit. Okay, so next thing we need to do is get our eyelet cut and whip it onto the end. But like before, I'm going to use a safety pin. I've got my safety pin here. Incidentally, these safety pins are 19mm. So if you're wondering what size to use, sort of a 1.9, 2 centimeter safety pin is ideal for this, what we're doing. So we'll take our pair of side cutters and we're just going to snip off the safety bit, not the eyelet, the safety bit at the end. So snip that off. And there we are. We are left with our little eyelet. So we've got our little eyelet cut there. I have to put my glasses on now because this is where we start to do some close-up work. So I'm going to try and pinch the eyelet between my thumb and forefinger, and then I'm going to place the quill against it, pinch it with my other thumb and forefinger. It's a bit fiddly. And then we're going to take our thread, and if you remember, I'm going to be whipping underneath and then over the top. So we start by going underneath and then over the top. And the reason I do this is it just helps me a little bit later when I start to turn the quill rather than the thread. So we'll get 3 or 4, 5 or 6 wraps on there, and then that eyelet will then be held in place. So what I'm going to do now is hold the thread still and start to twist the quill. Oh, I'm a poet. I don't know it. So just twisting the quill. Again, getting a good rotation there, keeping that thread fairly close together as you can. Just keep going until we go all the way up to the eyelet. As we get going, we can go a little bit quicker. Practice makes perfect with this. Honestly, the first few I did, I made a complete mess of it. And, you know, this is the technique that I've developed over a couple of years that I've been making floats. It works for me. I'm sure there are other techniques that you can use. When we get to the eyelet, obviously don't whip over the eye because you won't be able to use the eye. So stop at the base of the eye and then slightly change the angle so that we start whipping back the other way. Keep going until we've reached the bottom of the legs. There we go, keep going. Remember to keep that thread nice and tight. Keep that tension on the thread. So remember as well from the previous videos I explained, if I let go of the tension of the thread that I'm holding between my right hand and the quill, if I let that tension go, all of that whipping there is just going to come undone and unspiral. So if I want to change the position of my right hand that's holding the thread, I need to clamp the thread near the quill, on the quill, with my index finger. Then I can let go and nothing's going to come loose. So keeping that tension back on, I can just continue to whip round, remembering keeping those threads nice and tight and keeping them close together. All the way around we go. I'm just dropping off the edge now of the under whipping. And we're coming to the end of the legs as well. So also, if you remember from the previous videos, when we get to the end of the leg of the little eyelet, they can be a little bit sharp. So if we keep too much tension on the thread, it can actually cut the thread. Those little legs can cut the thread. So I'm just going to relax the tension slightly, not too much, but just slightly, so that the thread just drops off the side of it and then onto the shaft of the quill. So there we are. So a few more turns now. I'm going to come up a little way and we're going to stop there. So the next thing I need to do is find my little fishing line loop, which is what we made again in previous videos. And this is going to go underneath the thread. I'm just going to pinch that in place under my thumb and index finger, remembering not releasing the pressure on this to clamp the thread. I'm literally just pulling it underneath like that. And then I'm going to continue to whip round over the top of that fishing line loop, probably 3 or 4 times. So that's 1, 2, 3, one more for luck, 4. Clamp it down with your index finger, find your scissors and snip off. Leave about, I don't know, 5 or 6 centimeters at the bottom there. Snip that off, and that's our tag end. What we'll do now is take the tag end and we're going to pass it through the loop. Take the tag end, through the loop it goes, give it a little pull down, And then the bottom end of the fishing line, we're just going to pull, and that is going to grab that tag end and pull it underneath the thread that we've just whipped. Don't forget, don't put this down on your mat. That's the loop there. Don't put it down on your mat because you'll never find it again. I always just hang it up on one of my little clips I've got over there. So now we're left with the tag end, which we're just going to snip off with our sharp bladed knife. So remember, be careful when you're using the sharp blades. They are, really sharp, so be careful. Just place it underneath the thread that your tag end there, and just with a little slice, cuts through really easily. And there we are. That's the first part of the whipping done. I'm going to add some green decorative whipping just up here now. So let's move on to that. So we've done our black whipping. Now I'm going to add the green whipping. I've chosen green. Again, it's your choice. It doesn't have to be green. Thread of your choice. So using the thread now, slightly different way of starting. So when we did the eyelet there, we made the split and we clamped it in there. But now we haven't got that split to clamp into. So I'm going to use my thumbnail to hold the thread in place. So I've got the tag end to my left and the float is there. I'm going to lay that down quite close to where we finished the old black whipping there. Quite close to that. And again, clamping it under my thumbnail, and I'm going to go underneath and round over the top. So round we go a few times, just getting it nice and tight to the end of the black whipping. So it's almost like a seamless join. Go around 2 or 3 times. And what that's doing is actually whipping over the bit of thread that I'm holding underneath my thumbnail. So I've done that 2 or 3 times. And give that a little pull, just so it's nice and tight. But you can see actually I pulled it and it's beginning to come loose. Now that means I didn't clamp it properly in the first place. So let's start that again. It's okay to make mistakes. It's only human. So clamping it under my thumbnail, and I'm going to start that whip again. Over the top. I'm going to go around 2 or 3 times. Maybe let's do 4 or 5 this time. And hopefully that will stop it from spinning when I give it a bit of tension. There we are, much stronger now. So making sure it's all squashed down nice and tight against the black whipping. And that's that. So I'm going to hold that there underneath my index finger, pull the line out of the way, and I'm going to snip off, cut off the tag end. So using that sharp bladed knife again, just go right up to the edge, put a little bit of pressure on it. The tag end falls away. That. And we go back to whipping again. So now I've got the tension in my right hand on the thread, I can let go of my index finger. We'll give that 1 more turn, 2 more turns, and I'm going to start the decorative whip now. So I'm going to change the angle of the thread and the quill. And you can see now, rather than it all staying really tight, it spreads it out almost like a spiral. The quill shaft. And I'm going to go for a little band in the middle as well, just to mix things up. So I'm going to square off again. Start making a band in the middle. And then I'm going to add another spiral just above it. So change the angle again. And then when I get to the top, I'm going to match it with another band. Just a different decorative whip there. So remember, we've got to tie this end off. So don't whip up too far. So clamp it under your index finger. Let go of the other thread now. And I'm going to get my little fishing line eyelet loop. And I'm going to put it underneath the thread. Clamp it under my thumb and forefinger, index finger, which is it, index or fork? Index. And then I'm going to continue with another 3 or 4 whips. 2, 3. I'm going to leave it there because the band, this end and the bottom end, are about the same thickness. So it's a nice bit of symmetry there. So clamp it under your index finger, take your scissors, snip off your tag end, and then again, we're going to place that tag end inside the loop, pull it down, and then pull the bottom of the loop end, the fishing line loop, and that pulls the thread underneath. Oh, there we go, underneath the main thread. Put your loop away safely so you know where it is for next time. Now, make sure it's all nice and square, nice and neat, and then we're just going to snip off the tag end with our sharp blade. Yeah. So there we are. So now we've got the green whipping on. What I am going to do is just add a little black band at the top, just so we've got black top and bottom. Back in a minute. Now the whipping is done, we're going to add a little coat of the water-based varnish onto the whipping. That's going to seal it and stop it from coming undone and loose, so it acts a bit like a protector and a bit like a glue as well. So the Rustings varnish that I use is the water-based varnish. It's really, really good. I'm not sponsored by them, by the way, but I do like the product, so that's why I'm using it. I'm going to give that a coat. It's worth mentioning at this point as well that the threads that I choose to use and the threads that I buy, I try and make sure that it's got an NCP rating. Now, NCP is not National Car Parks. It's non-color preserver required. So it means that when you place your coat of varnish onto it, it doesn't darken the color. So imagine having a piece of cloth that you get wet, it gets darker. When you apply your first coat of varnish, particularly on cotton threads, it will darken it down. And if you don't want to lose that color, you might need to add a color preserver, but that's a whole nother kettle of fish. So I try and find threads that have the NCP rating on them already. And then when I apply that little coat of varnish, it doesn't darken very much. There might be a slight change in the color, but usually that comes back once the varnish has dried up. So let's get the tin open and let's get that coat of varnish on. So opening up the tin, I've already given it a bit of a shake. It says stir well, but I like to shake. There we are. Find your brush, nice soft bristled brush, nice and soft, and very simply dip your brush and hang it on. You can be quite liberal with this varnish and just spread it around quite evenly. Make sure you're getting all the little cracks and crevices of the threads. I'm not going to varnish the entire shaft of the quill. I only want to cover the bit of whipping that I've done already. And that's it. Done. I know it looks white, but don't worry, that's all going to dry nice and clear. So the varnish is now dry, and I need to swap my focus now from this end up to the tip end of the float. This is where I'm going to add the colour. So I need to work out how much colour I want to add to the top of the float, how deep I want it. For personal choice, I'm going to go for about 5 centimetres. That allows me then to adjust the float with the shotting weight. So if I want to bring the float right down and just have the tip showing, then I can add a little bit more weight. If I want to have more of the tip showing, then I can take a little bit of the shotting weight off. This allows for different weather conditions. If it's slightly more windy, I want the float to sit higher. If it's a really calm, still day, I might want to pip the float right down to get those really sensitive bites. So I'm going to measure 5 centimetres from the tip there. I'm going to use my pencil and my ruler to do that. And then once I've done that, I'm going to give it a base coat of matte white. So there we are, put a little pencil mark there, 5 centimetres. And get my paint pot ready. So for this, I'm using Revel's matte white. It's number 5. Again, I'm not sponsored, so it's just a nice paint to use. So let's get the lid off that. And let's get painting. So find my mark, and then I tend to brush away from the mark. And then I've got my starting point all the way around. Nothing difficult about this part of the job. Get a nice even coat all the way. Now, depending on the patternation of the quill itself, you can see when we've been handling the quills earlier that there are dark areas and light areas. If you're painting over a dark area, you might need to do 2 coats or maybe even 3 coats, just so there is no shadowing underneath the white, because even with a faint shadow under the white there, it will show through when we put the green or the orange paints on the tops. So nice even coat, nice and clear. I'm going to add a second coat to that. Now, one thing I need to do to speed up the process of making these videos, I've already prepared the next few steps for making the floats. So if the patternation in the quill changes, it's purely because I'm trying to speed up the process. Otherwise, this whole thing will take me days and days to do. So I've got one that's already been painted. It's had 2 coats on it and it's nice and dry. So let's move on to that one and we can see what the next step is. So as I said, here's one I made earlier. We've had 2 coats of the white on the tip there. So I'm going to change the color now and add the yellow. I'm going to use the yellow as the undercoat. I'm going to have, when it's finished, I'm going to have yellow at the bottom, and then I'm going to go for an orange, I think, at the top. But we'll paint the whole thing yellow first, and then I'll paint the orange over the top of that. So here we go. So I don't need to measure out how far up I'm putting the yellow because it's all going over it. If you're interested, again, this is Revel and it's SM312. Let's double check that. Yeah, SM312. I think SM stands for silk matte. So yeah, nice finish on that. So just painting the whole thing, again, quick and easy. You can be quite liberal with this yellow paint. That goes on really easily. We keep going until the whole thing's painted. You might need 2 coats, you might not. I think we're going to be all right with 1 coat on this. If you can hear the sort of rumbling in the background, I live right near Heathrow Airport, so we get a lot of plane noise. So if you can hear any rumbling in the background, that's what it is. So there we are. That's all yellow paint now, and it's ready to hang up and dry. So I'm going to hang that up and dry and move on to the next step. So the yellow is now dried. That's all nice and even on there. Got a nice even coating. There's no dark shadows underneath. So what I'm going to do now is add the orange tip. I'm going to measure down where I want the tip to come to, give it a little mark with a pencil, and then I can get that painted orange. So out comes the ruler again. It was 5 centimeters was the yellow. I'm going to mark it. I'm going to leave the yellow bit at the bottom as to 1 centimeter. So I will have 1 centimeter of yellow at the bottom, and the rest of it is going to be orange. So pencil away. Look at that. So the orange I'm using is another Revel color again, and it's matte 25, which is like a high-vis orange color. And let's get painting. So again, this will probably take 2 coats to get a nice even color all the way through. Again, just painting from the pencil line up. Don't worry if you can see the pencil line under the paint, because we will be whipping over the top of that a little bit later on, and that will hide that little pencil mark. So paint going on nice and evenly. And again, where the orange meets the yellow, don't worry if the line's a little bit scruffy, because when we do whip over it, it will hide that join and make it all look nice and neat. Nearly finished. I think that is just about it for the first coat. And we'll leave that to dry now, and we'll move on to the next stage. I'll put a coat on that first before we move on. So I'll let that dry, put on a second coat, and then we'll move on. So that second coat of orange has gone off now. So there we are. So that's ready now. That's painted. Now, like I said to you before in previous videos, you could use the float just like that. That'll be absolutely fine. I'm going to add a bit of whipping on the top here, just for a bit of decoration, neatens things up and makes the float look a little bit more professional. So that's what we're going to do. So I take my thread and we're going to start the whipping just like we started the green bit at the bottom. So where the yellow and the orange join together, I'm going to place the thread just underneath my thumbnail there. Hope you can see that. And I'm going to clamp it there. Now you'll notice that I'm quite near the join between the red and the yellow. So again, going underneath the float to begin with. And then I'm going to bring that round 3 or 4 times and I'll be whipping over the top of that little bit of thread that I'm holding underneath my fingernail, thumbnail. Once I've got 3 or 4 turns on that, I can just neaten it all up, make sure there's no gaps. That's all nice and tight. And then I'll give it one more turn. Just cut off that little tag end with my sharp blade. Turns out my blade isn't that sharp. There we are. And I'm going to just do a couple more turns just to cover that little tag end. And now I'm going to change the angle, whip down through the yellow and create another band at the base. Sure there's no gaps. So get to that point. I've let go of this end of the thread. Remember to clamp it under your index finger there. So that's not going anywhere. Now I need to find my loop of fishing line, which I've got here. And I'm going to place that underneath. Sorry, my hand's in the way. Place that underneath the thread. Clamp it under my thumb and index finger. And then we're going to do 3 or 4 more turns over the top of the fishing line loop. 2, 3, 4. There we are. Give that a little tug. Make sure it's nice and tight. Again, clamp it under your index finger before you let go of the main thread. Find your scissors and snip off the little tag end. Okay. So our next job is to push the thread through the loop, pull it through, and then the bottom end of the loop now, the fishing line loop, I'm going to pull through. That's going to grab hold of the black thread and pull it underneath the whipping. Don't forget to put your loop in a safe place. And there we are. Neaten that up, make sure it's nice and square all the way around, nice and straight. There we go. So now we've just got to cut off that little tag end using your sharp blade. Done. So the whipping is now finished. So remember here as well, you can be as decorative as you want. You can add different colors, you can change the color, you don't have to whip in black, you don't have to whip at all. You can whip as far down the shaft as you want. It's entirely up to you as to how you decorate it. Some nice coloured bands on it or anything like that. It's just your imagination. Let it run wild. So I'm happy with what we've done so far. What I might do is add a green band just underneath the black. And that was going to sort of contrast or balance out a little bit of green whipping at the bottom. And then we're going to give it a coat of our rusting varnish. So I'm going to add the little bit of green whipping now. So here we go. We're going to start that off just the same way as we did the black whipping. And clamp it underneath my thumb. And we're going underneath the whip or underneath the float to start the whipping. I'm going to give that 3 or 4 turns. Holds that thread in place, and then give that a little tug, just a slight tug, and then make sure it's all nice and neat and pushed up next to the black. Keep my hands down so we can see. Snip off the little tag end using our sharp knife. There we are. I don't want this green band to be particularly thick and deep, so I'm going to put my fishing line loop underneath pretty quickly or early. There we are. So I'm holding it under my thumb, just tucking it under my index finger there. That holds it in place. Back with the tension on the thread, and I'm going to do 3 more turns. 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. So clamped it under my index finger, got my tag end. I'm going to cut that with the scissors. And then I think you know what to do by now. Put that tag end through the loop. Pull it down and then pull the bottom end of the tag through, and there we are, we're done. So make sure that's nice and neat, and then we're going to slice off tag end. Done. There we are. So that's all done, and we're now ready to varnish. So let's do that. Rustin's Clear Outdoor Varnish here. This is the water-based varnish, remember, and it does 2 jobs. It acts as a seal for the thread and a glue for the thread. So once I've varnished it, I can handle the float a little bit more freely without risk of the threads beginning to unravel and come apart. So dipping my brush in, and again, you can be quite liberal with the clear varnish here. And I'm not just going to paint the tip of the float, I'm going to continue and paint the whole shaft all the way down to where we varnished before at the bottom. So just giving it a good old coat of varnish all the way around. Making sure, again, where the threads are spiraling around there, that we get the varnish right into the cracks all the way around where the thread meets the float. You get a nice even covering all the way around. There we are. I think that's done. So we're going to leave that to dry now. I'm going to hang that up to dry. It'll probably take 20-30 minutes to dry, and then we can get the float shotted. That'll be next. The varnish is now dry. Our next step is to get the shotting weight. Again, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. Something that I like to do, and I'll write the shotting weight onto the shaft of the float there, and then when I get it out of my tackle box, I know exactly how much shot it's going to take, and get fishing quicker. So I've got me pasta jar, pasta vessel here, which is nice and deep for me to sink the float into. So I've got a couple of shot. Here we are, let's put that on the camera. I've got a couple of shot already on the line. So I'm just going to feed the eye, or feed the line through the eye, just like you would do if you were fishing, really. And then clamp it in place with another shot. So at the moment, I've got 3 BB on there. I'm just going to put a 4th BB on there. I have a sneaking suspicion that might be a little heavy, but let's start with 4. See that? Let's start with 4. See how we go. So let's put it into the jar. Okay, not bad. It's sitting down a little bit low for my liking. Let's bring it to the edge here so you can maybe see it slightly better on the camera. Ideally, what I would like is where that top black line is, that to be on the surface of the water, the level with the surface of the water. So I think if I remove one of those shot, it should bring it up to a better line. So let's take it out of the water. Let's remove one of the shot. And let's see. So that's now 3BB. Can you see that? That's 3BB. And we're just going to put it back. Oh, there we are. That's much better. Again, it's personal choice. Now, if I was fishing on a really still lake or something like that, or a canal, and I was going for, small fish, roach, rudd, that sort of thing, I might want to put that fourth shot on, or maybe even slightly more, and pip that float right down so it's just the tip showing above the surface. But by giving myself that long orange tip there, I've got the choice I can make for the style of fishing that I'm doing. So I'm really happy with that. 3BB's a nice weight, nice casting weight for the float, sitting perfectly on that line. So that's all good. I'm happy with that. So let's get the weight written on the side of the float, and then we can move on to putting the final coat of varnish on. I've got my Sharpie ready. I've dried off the float with just a bit of paper towel, and I'm going to write the shotting weight onto the side with my Sharpie. So I've got quite a fine tip Sharpie. I don't want a big thick one because it will look messy. So 3BB was the weight that we said. So I'm going to write that on the side. 3BB. Back on. And as you can see there, we've got shotting weight written on it. So now what we need to do is give it the final coat of Yacht varnish. So let's move on to that. I'm just going to have a little bit of a clear up, and we can get ready to put the final coat on. So now is the time to put the varnish on. So I'm going to open up my tin of Rustin's Yacht varnish. Again, this time I'm going for a satin finish. I do prefer the satin finish to the gloss. Again, it's your choice. They're your floats after all. So I'll find my soft brush for the varnish. Now I'm going to varnish this in 2 stages because I've got to be able to hold the float. So I'm going to varnish up to about where the green line is. I'll leave that to dry overnight, and then I'll be able to turn it over and paint the tip section. So, very simple. Start varnishing. Again, fairly light with the varnish this time. Where we were quite liberal with the water-based varnish, we can be a little bit more careful with the Yacht varnish, because what we don't want is the varnish to run and cause, runs and drips on the side as it dries up. So I am spreading that varnish quite thinly. You can always do 2 coats, that's no problem. A little bit more. Just continuing to paint or varnish, spread the varnish on the shaft of the float. Good cover all the way around. Just the tiniest dips. I'm just literally dipping the tip of the brush in the paint, or varnish even. Sorry, it's my childish sense of humour kicking in. There we are. So that's all varnished now. So again, I've gone up to the yellow line. So when I varnish next time, when I varnish the tip, I know just to varnish up to the green line even. So there we are. So I'm going to hang that to dry. Now the Yacht varnish will take a lot longer to dry. It will be touch dry and handleable, if that's a word, in probably about 8 to 12 hours, depending on the temperature of the room, etc. But I will definitely leave this overnight and come back to it tomorrow and finish off that top section. To be honest, I'll probably put 2 coats of varnish on it. As Blue Peter traditions, here's one I made earlier, so I'm going to leave this one now, and we've got the finished float, so I'll show you that now. You've already seen it, but I'll show it to you again. So I'm going to hang this up to dry. If I can find the peg. There we are. And we go back to our original float, and there we go. That's it. It's done. So what we need to do now just like we've done in previous videos, to get out on the lake and go fishing. Let's see you bankside. See you in a bit. Well, thank you for joining me lakeside, everyone. One absolutely beautiful day. It's mid-November, sun's out, the leaves are turning all the golds and browns and oranges. It's absolutely beautiful. There's hardly a breath of wind. Perfect conditions for float fishing. So let's get out there with the porcupine quill. So my favourite floats of any of that I use and make. I love a porcupine quill. They're really sensitive. They sit in the water beautifully. So let's take a look at how I've rigged up. Pretty much the same as I did with the goose quill float. If we look, we've got 2 rubber float stops. You can see that there. Float out of the way. 2 rubber float stops, just locking that float into position. We shot this one at 3BB and a number 4. So we're going down, and I've bulk shotted my 3BBs right up the top there, right close to the float. So that really gets that float sitting and cocked nicely quite quickly. And then dropping right the way down to the bottom end where I've got a number 4 shot, a hook link down to a size 16 hook. So the main line from my reel is 8 pounds line, and then my hook link is a 6 pound line with a size 16 hook on it. I've gone for the size for the 6 pound line just because there are some reasonable fish in here. There's lots of silvers, which is great. That's what I'm targeting today, but there are some quite meaty carp in here as well. So that 6 pound line will hopefully give me a fighting chance. So that's the setup. Let's take a little look at the rod and reel that I'm using. So the reel you've seen before, this is the Shimano Aero Perfection, which I got on eBay. This was my £8 purchase. Now you saw this in the Bamboo Waggler video, so don't forget to check that out if you haven't seen it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for any more of the videos that I make. The rod I'm using today is an Abu Garcia. It's a Maxar feeder. Again, quite an old rod. Not quite sure of the year that it was made, but I'm guessing probably mid-90s. Nice rod, nice and light. It is a feeder rod, but it's fine for float fishing. Good, it's got a lovely long cork handle. I do like a nice long handle, and I can move the reel up and down because we've got the movable reel seats here. So that's the setup. Again, nice and simple. Let's get some maggots on the hook, and let's see if we can catch a fish. So here we are. So I'm going to fish double maggot. I'm going to go 1 red, 1 white. So I don't know about you, but I like to hook my maggots right at the back of the maggot, on the flat end, as I call it. So we've got 1 red and 1 white. There we are. So 1 red, 1 white. I've already plumbed the depth. It's not too deep here because I'm going to fish the margins. I'm going to fish really close in. There we are. Just give my line a little bit of a sink. There we go. And just let that rest. So yeah, I'm fishing the margins. I do like fishing in the margins with floats. You do get some big fish coming in, especially towards the end of the day. It's quite early in the day today, but towards the end of the day, as the fishermen are packing up, they all chuck their baits in. And yeah, fishing in the margins, especially late afternoon, early evening, can be a really, really good time to fish it. So let's see what happens. I'm going to follow up my float with just a pinch of maggots now, and I'm just going to chuck them in over the top of the float. There we are. Now we sit back and we wait. Hooray! Oh, it's come off. Oh, I'm quite sure what that was. A little perch, I think. Let's see if there's any more down there. So I'm not having much luck fishing on the bottom. So what I'm going to try and do is shallow up and go sort of roughly mid-water. Now, before I do that, if I want to go back to fishing the bottom again, I don't want to have to replumb the depth. So little tip here, put your hook at the bottom of your rod tip or your rod butt, there we are. And I can see now that my float is roughly in line with the first eyelet on my float rod there. So when I go to reset my depth, I know that if I move my float back up to the eye, then I know I'm back on the bottom. So there we are. So let's move my float down now. So that's the beauty of these little rubber float stops. Just literally slide them down the line. So I'm going to shallow right up. And then, so I'm fishing what? 2 foot there. So let's get that in and see if there's any fish mid-water. Hopefully there'll be some roach and some rudd around. So floats in. I'm going to follow that up with a couple of maggots over the top of the float. And let's see what happens. See if there's any interest. Oh, there we are. That didn't take long. Little perch by the looks of it. Oh, and he's foul hooked. Poor little bugger. Oh, no, he's not. He just had it caught round his fin. So there we are. A respectable little perch, and he has scoffed it. So let's find my degorger. In the sun, there's the hook. There it is. That's the joy of perch. They do like to woof their prey down. There we are. So, lovely little wasp. Well, he's got his fin up for you. Look at that. Absolutely stunning. Go on, put your fin up. There we are. Beautiful. Let's get him back. And away. So, that was good. Nice register on the quill as well. Again, I do love porcupine quills. They really are quite sensitive. I'm just going to change them over. I'm going to go for 2 white maggots this time. Now, my dad calls maggots gentles. I've no idea why they are called gentles. So if anyone can leave a comment in the comment section below as to why maggots are called gentles, I'd love to know. Thanks. Let's get it out there. Follow that up with a pinch of maggots. I think straight away, yes, straight away we've got a little take. I think that might be another little perch. Yeah, I think we found the perch. Oh, I tell a lie. It is a very respectable roach. Beautiful. Let's just try and show you this to camera. There we are, lovely little roach. Hope you can see that. Beautiful. Let's put him back. So just that little change up into the mid-water there has had a big effect. So I think we can reuse those maggots. Reuse and recycle, that's what we love. So let's see what happens. Another little pinch. Well, let's hope this one doesn't ping off. 3rd time lucky, eh? Let's just loosen that drag slightly. Rather nice mirror. Look at that. Let's get the net. Come on. Where are you? You're not finished yet, are you? Here we go. Fabulous. Right. Let's get you on the mat and have a look. There we are. Hook's fallen out. Beautiful. And look at this absolute cracker of a mirror carp. There we are. Look, what a beauty. All caught on the Porcupine Quill. Absolutely love my Porcupine Quill floats. They are superb in the water. They are so sensitive to the bites. They really sit nicely. And this is proof in the pudding that they work. So join me back in the pleasuring shed. And yeah, we'll see you there. Take care. Here we are back in the pleasuring shed. Thank you very much for joining me Bankside. I hope you has had lots of fun watching it as much as I had filming it and making it. All thanks to the Porcupine Quill. What a great float. I love my Porcupine Quill floats. They're really sensitive. They're really, really good floats for fishing, all different types of styles. So let's put that to one side. Now, we've made floats from bamboo cane, which we can get pretty much anywhere. If you're lucky enough to have a bush in your garden, that's even better. We've made floats from goose quills, which we find free laying around on the floor. And we've made floats from porcupine quills, which we can get in old tackle boxes. We can pick them up at jumble sales, car boot sales, charity shops and all that sort of stuff. So really, really cheap and easy to make. Now we need to step it up a gear and start looking at some of the different materials that we can use. So in our next video, we're going to start to focus on something called sarkanda reed. We'll go into a lot more detail about the type of reed. If you take a look at the board here, you get some idea of the sort of reed that we're talking about. It's really easy to use, really easy to work with, and it can help us produce a whole variety of different styles of floats. So join me again in the next video. If you like what you saw in this video, please don't forget, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and then you'll be alerted to all of our new videos as we produce them. So thanks again very much, and join me again in the pleasuring shed, and I hope to see you soon. Hello.